Paul Schrader.
Thank you. You know, they say that the average human being throws out as much heat as a 100-watt bulb. So now we're looking at a lot of heat down here. It's all squeezed together.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
I have to say that is probably one of the greatest cinematic endings in all of film history, and definitely one of the best kisses. And I also just think that you ask so many questions that are so important, especially to today's climate, and you dare to answer them, and also just remind us that we're all just human. So I'm just wondering how the story came to be and why you wanted to tell this story.
It was, strangely enough, an intellectual decision, not an emotional one. Before I started screenplays, I was a film critic and a seminarian, and I had written a book on theological aesthetics about the spiritual cinema. And then as events transpired, I ended up making films. But I never wanted to touch the spiritual cinema. And people who would try to connect the films I had made with the book I had written, I said, no, that's not me. I'm never going to go there. You're never going to catch me skating on that Braconian ice. I'm going to go. And then about 3 years ago, I was giving an award to Paweł Pawlowski, a Polish director who had done a film called Ida at the New York Society of Film Critics. And I was talking to Paweł. And that is also a very rigorous spiritual film. And he knew my book, and he was talking to me about my book, and I was talking to him about the film. And we were also talking about the new economics of filmmaking, whereby a film that was considered financially irresponsible 20 or 30 years ago is not financially irresponsible today because of the lowered cost of production. And I left that dinner and I walked uptown to Chelsea. And I said to myself, okay, it's time. You're going to be 70 next year. It's time to write that script you swore you would never write. It's time to write a spiritual script. And that's how it began, not with an emotional commitment, with an intellectual one. I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And all of a sudden, once I freed myself from the inhibitions I had about tackling such a subject, and the possible repercussions of tackling such a subject. Then it was just a matter of saying, okay, I'm going to do it now. What are all the films that I respect of this ilk? Watch them all again and figure out where you fit into this scheme. And so it was much more a level of calculation rather than spontaneous, quote unquote, inspiration.
Amazing. I also think it was so important, Ethan's performance. So how did you cast him and how did you work with him? Because I think this is the best role of his career.
Well, normally you don't write for an actor because that makes you a lazy writer. You're sitting there, you're writing a scene, and you hear Al Pacino do it, and you say, wow, what a great fucking scene. It's not a great fucking scene. Al's a great fucking actor. So you do everything you can not to connect what you're writing with any personage. But about halfway through the script, I started thinking about Ethan. Because there is a certain physiognomy of the tormented man of the cloth. Whether Claude Ledoux or Montgomery Clifton, I confess. They sort of look a certain way, and I said, Ethan looks that way. Also, he's gotten old enough now. He's gotten some very interesting lines in his face. I think maybe this is the moment for him. And even though he's not this type of actor. So I sent it to him, and he responded within 24 hours and said, let's do this. And then I meet with him, and I said, now, Ethan, do you know what a recessive performance is? He said, yeah, because Ethan is not like this character. Ethan is very eager to please, hippie kind of a jokester. And he never really worked on the recessive interior side. I said, Ethan, now this is an interior performance. That means it's a lean back performance. So that when you're performing and you sense any amount of interest about what you're saying, lean away. Step away from it. Reject it. And if it's still there, step away again. Now this is the opposite of what an actor is normally trained to do, which is to embrace the audience's love of his entertaining ability, rather than reject it. But I thought Ethan would be a very interesting actor as a recessive, rejecting actor, as opposed to an actor whose primary desire was to please.
Do you feel like this? There's been a lot of talk about this film being slow cinema, and you're obviously very inspired by transcendental cinema and slow-moving films. However, I find this to be like one of the most intense films I've watched in the last few years. And so even though it's slow, you've managed to build up like this intensity into it. So how did you work that into the pacing?
And here's what happened, Elise. I set out to do a slow film, a durational film that takes its time. And when I first screened it for my friends, I said, no, this is a very slow movie. It's very talky, full of God talk. You know, be prepared, relax. And then when I screened it, and somebody said afterwards, this is not a slow movie. But I thought it was, because I was using all of these withholding devices, delayed cuts, certain kinds of composition, lack of music. These are all withholding devices that keep the viewer from being satiated, you know, from receiving what they intend. So you keep refusing to give the viewer what they want. And at some point the viewer does one of two things. Either they get up and leave, or they start leaning towards you. And once they start leaning toward you, then a whole new game has started, because film audiences are not inclined to give. They are inclined to receive. They're inclined to be passive. They're inclined to have everything done for them. So when you start making a film that says, we're not going to do what you want us to do, now what are you going to do about that? You going to leave, or are you going to kind of come toward us? So I knew that was the kind of film I was doing. But here's what I didn't fully understand. I was using a number of I was using a number of intellectual cinema models for the European cinema. Diary of a Country Priest, Bresson, Winter Light,